Kayla Golden, God bless it, you're back.
Thanks for having me, Matt.
Thank you for coming back. It's a tricky thing having a guest like you. In the field that you're in and the stuff you do, it's a little crazy. But you, formerly of the Idaho Department of Water Resource, and you initially came in, thank you very much, to talk about the cloud seeding program that Idaho has been engaged in for some time. Now,
yes.
History on cloud seeding in Idaho. Obviously, we've had individual operators throughout the state since the 50s. And then in the 2000s, people started realizing like, okay, perhaps this should be a state engaged, endeavor, which is, state funded. But obviously, nobody's pinching a penny out of the state of Idaho without real clear evidence that this thing works.
Right.
So in the teens, obviously collaborating with a lot of different scientific departments, Idaho kind of broke studies where they showed the efficacy and conclusive value of cloud seeding, which is like, hey, man, in a storm, we flew a plane through a cloud and we got Doppler verified zigzags where it's like the plane was going
unnatural patterns. Yep.
And they're like, snow does not form in a zigzag in the middle of a cloud.
No.
But you guys were able to show conclusively like, hey, look, these are ice crystals forming, snow crystals, literally following the plane's pattern. So whichever pattern the plane went in, that's where the ice went. You're like, okay, here we go. This has become an enormous thing for the country, nay, the world. People are very worried about it. And you, again, do no longer work for the Department of Water Resource, but you do have specialty knowledge about what's going on. We have legislation popping up all around not just the state, but the country. Talk to me about the current state of cloud seeding.
Yeah, so I would say the term viral probably means something differently today than it did, many years ago. Many years ago, when you say the word viral, you're kind of talking about some sort of sickness or illness. And honestly,
there you go.
With cloud seeding, nowadays, I think that, a lot of folks didn't know that it existed a long time ago because it really hadn't gone viral on the internet, right? And so you start seeing a lot more information pop up, a lot of misinformation with regard to cloud seeding, and there's not a lot of information out there on the facts and the science to really counter that. And so really you had a few different posts that said, oh my gosh, this is happening out there and nobody's telling us anything about it. And so it's really just gone wild and rampant on the internet, and it's been allowed to grow and create sort of a false narrative because there hasn't been factual information or more information out there on the platform where people receive information today. And so you and I have kind of talked about this a little bit, this whole idea of, the fourth, de facto fourth branch of government kind of being social media and controlling the narrative for a lot of things that happen out there. And that's sort of been allowed to run rampant with regard to weather mod and cloud seeding. And not because those facts are real, in my opinion, in my experience, but because there hasn't been, folks like scientists, researchers, people who participate in programs out there on social media, providing information where people receive it. You can go to websites like the Council, the North American Weather Modification Council and the Weather Mod Association websites and find this information. But as we've talked about, a lot of people don't go to websites anymore. They look on social media. And so in today's day and age, people tend to get that information when it comes to policy from social media. That's where they get their facts and information, hear about what's going on in the world. And
that's where their world forming views come from.
Right, exactly. And so if the only thing that you're seeing on the internet, on social media is this wild misinformation, that's starting to drive policy. And so we're starting to see that in a multitude of different states. Actually, I think we're up to 34 different states right now who have proposed some type of ban or legislation related to weather modification, and largely based on misinformation, often related to condensation trails. And people just don't really have a good concept of what cloud seeding is versus some other, technologies that have been researched and proposed. And I certainly don't have any expertise in those alternative methods. I know about cloud seeding, but especially here in the West, it is literally one of the only tools that we have to bring new water to a basin, right? And the West is in a water crisis, not just here in the Western United States, but many different countries across the world. We're seeing water scarcity issues. And I mean, water, as everybody knows, is really the life source of everything it is on Earth. And so when we're seeing these depleting supplies, going out there and proposing legislation or policy to ban one of the few tools that we have to increase water supply is really a dangerous precedent, in my opinion.
Yeah, look, a lot that you've said. Well, I read an article actually years back that was talking about the water crisis in the state that shall not be named. And it was saying like, hey, we have this water problem. And yeah, everybody says, okay, well, that's that state's problem. And the article did a very good job of saying, no. It doesn't have a problem. We have a problem, because if that state doesn't get the requisite water, kiss all of our food supply, or a huge, massive amount of our food supply, gone. And you have that problem in Idaho as well. Like, we grow a huge amount of produce and food in this state, and that is a real thing. And if the water supply for that stuff goes out, yeah, you have economic impact, but we have food security impact in the country, right? So it's not just that the West has a water crisis. It's the United States has a water crisis, because where we need that water for its highest and best use for agriculture, we are not getting it, or we're not getting it at the levels that we used to. And that is an enormous problem.
Exactly.
Right? And so you have people that have concerns about, what's interesting? It's not interesting. It's kind of sad. I've started digging into minerals, critical minerals. Okay. And what I didn't know until about a month ago is a critical mineral is defined by having two characteristics. One, it's absolutely irreplaceable for economic or defense capabilities. Okay. So literally, it's like, if this is a critical mineral, we cannot continue functioning. Like, you can't build the screen for the iPhone, or like you can't manufacture bullets, something, or tank armor. That makes this one strike critical mineral. Second strike to be a critical mineral, the United States can't supply it. That's a huge problem. So not only is it irreplaceable, we don't have it. We either can't mine it, we can't manufacture it, we can't supply it for ourselves. Fine. The issue is that mining has some skeletons in the closet, even specifically here in Idaho. You have instances where, less scrupulous mining companies are just straight up greedy, evil people from like centuries ago, right? Or let's say decades and decades ago, long time ago, did these really terrible things. And things like having to do with lead. And we have a rich history of industry along the West Coast. So you have these problems with, say, a thing like lead, okay? And that produces a lot of damage. Okay. The issue is, as is distinct from cloud seeding, in areas that had refining and areas that had all these things, you can take a shovel full of dirt and be like, okay, let's test it. This has lead in it. It has lead in it like 5 times the level we recommend. Oh my gosh, these people are poisoned. You have old refinery sites, right? Okay, this has like petroleum waste or something like way higher. You have fracking. Okay, like let's test the water. We have this stuff. That's really bad. All of these things you can point to and say, look, this is a quantity of this thing that is bad. Cloud seeding seems to be one of the only industries where there is no evidence of contamination. There is no evidence that this, like all of the things that people are saying are coming about. There's no, to this day, I can't find a single person who will tell me like what the secret government agency is that's like, responsible for chemtrails, right? They always say they are doing it. I'm like, I don't want things sprayed over my house that like beryllium, aluminum, whatever the things are. It's like, tell me who's doing it. They're like, well, they are, right? There's no evidence that people can point to for risks and dangers and toxicity that these people are claiming, but the claims go on in the absence of any kind of verifiable proof.
And they're moving forward policy at that. I mean, that is largely the driver for a lot of the different proposed policy or pieces of legislation in these different states is people complaining, that they see the lines in the sky, that we're dispersing all of these chemicals, that they're all unhealthy, and there remains zero evidence of that. It seems to be inconceivable that this could come from just regular air traffic. I mean, you think about population growth across the West, even here just in the Boise area. Even since 2020. And if you look at, the airport has records on their website of different flight the data history of flights coming in and out. And yeah, there's a lot more lines in the sky because there's a lot more planes coming in and out of our airports around here, but people don't seem to want to be receptive to that information. Cloud seeding has been around.
If I may, that stems from the people saying like, I've lived here 50 years. We didn't used to have this. Now in the last 5 or 10 years, it's like, yeah, there's also been a population explosion, right? Like, okay, yeah, then we have more flights coming out, right? 10, 20, 100% more. Like I don't know how many, but it's like, look, I understand you're saying that this is more than it used to be, but does that, like, what does that mean?
Right.
Right.
Yes.
Right. Right.
There is significantly more air traffic, but the challenge is why doesn't the public seem to want to understand that is actually a result of physical processes and not some nefarious act, of government, somebody out there intentionally trying to spray chemicals? Because a condensation trail or a cloud is literally the result of a physical process, right? You can close your bathroom door, crank up the shower, and make a cloud in your bathroom. Why is that? Because of the temperature variance, right? You just all of a sudden added hot water to a room that was otherwise cool. And so the same process happens in the sky when a jet airplane or, an engine flying hot air through a cold atmosphere, it creates that water condensation and it turns it into a cloud. And so that's visually what you can see. That is what a white line is water in the sky that you can see. Chemicals, I have never seen any explanation for how a chemical can reproduce that physical process. But why does the public seem to be so adverse to, believing that concept? We have undeniable evidence. It's been well studied, well researched, what the process of cloud formation is. We have a lot of data, a lot of evidence, but because of the stuff floating around on social media, because of these viral posts about, we've seen way more way more condensation trails. I don't even like to acknowledge the term, the EPA has come out and made statements against this just recently, in conjunction with the FAA, NOAA, they've all come out and said, condensation trails are the lines that you see in the sky. We've seen zero evidence. We can't find any evidence of any chemicals that can create this process or who would be doing that and why. But because social media has taken hold of this narrative and these posts are willing to, are allowed to go viral and shared so frequently, that seems to be controlling, the general belief, and it's led to changes in policy, which is sort of a scary, idea,
lit.
a lack of an evidence, and now it's even being proposed at the federal level. We have a federal, whether or not that will move forward, I don't know. But we have a proposed federal ban to get rid of all weather mod, including cloud seeding. And, you think about areas like the Colorado River Basin, massive, massive water challenges. Cloud seeding is one of the critical components of the Colorado River Basin, plan and negotiations that they have going on. We obviously use it here in Idaho for a number of different reasons. We use it in Utah, it's used in California, Wyoming, North Dakota, all these different places for water supply sustainability, and in some places for, hail mitigation, damage control, again, against crops and infrastructure, and proposing a federal ban based on misinformation that people found on the internet is really a scary concept.
This is okay. Did you ever see House of Cards? That
Yes.
series? Okay. So who's the dude who gets he's kind of like the bad boy congressman who starts hanging out and he gets caught doing blow, and then he has dirt on a bunch of people, and what's his name? What's the main character's name? Kevin Spacey. What's his character?
I'm drawing
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. But the point is, he gets him drunk and then puts him in the garage, and then he makes like he committed suicide, right? Okay. That mechanism of death was literally every time we turn on our cars, we're all reproducing that. Okay, so we have cars going up and down the road all day long that are spewing out absolutely deadly gases at a concentration.
Right.
And then we as a community decide, okay, what is our what is our air quality today? And then we have the air quality index, and we have it on our phones. We can know all of these things. We know that that's totally deadly. And we tolerate it because we check the concentrations all the time and say, is this too much or is it too little? Same thing with crops, right? We have herbicides, we have pesticides. And again, I know a lot of people have a lot of things to say about that, but the government does recognize, hey, at this concentration of this chemical X, that's not okay. Beneath that concentration, it's okay. We have that same thing with lead, right? We have the lead-based paint that's still in older houses, and we tell people look, it's okay as long as you have X. So we have this relationship, this dynamic relationship with very harmful chemicals that we all acknowledge, hey, we don't like these things, but we can tolerate them at a certain level, and we test that level. We have skipped that step when it comes to cloud seeding. We have skipped the step of what is the concentration and is that okay for us? We go straight to this must be bad at any level. And no, we don't have any evidence that even exists in our natural world. People say, doesn't it build up in the water columns? Doesn't it build up in soil? find anywhere it's building up and let's burn those people to the ground. Like, fine, but
And
like, where is it?
That's not for lack of testing, because we have done testing. Wyoming has done excessive testing. Australia, other countries have done pre and post seeding analysis, and the North American Weather Mod Council. So for those who don't know what that is, the North American Weather Mod Council is sort of a consortium of 28 different states and public agencies who come together to learn about weather mod and to support other states, right? And so they have all come together and pooled money to conduct independent research to evaluate the effects of cloud seeding, in addition to other studies that have been done. So Wyoming, for example, they've gone out and tested soils, tested water. We've done that here in Idaho. They've tested soils, water. We've tested, fish to see what the silver content is. I mean, think about somebody like in the big white suits, when you see like going out to test for chemicals and things like that. I mean, you have to have clean gear that's sterilized for weeks, even months on end, to ensure that the natural elements that you come into contact with every day don't contaminate the samples that you're taking. And so we've gone out into the natural environment and tried to look for silver iodide or silver that has accumulated as a result of cloud seeding. And I mean, you're talking parts per trillion versus natural stream contents, undissolved particulates of parts per billion. So orders of magnitude in difference. And we still cannot find any accumulation of silver as a result of cloud seeding. I mean, you're talking about grams of particulate that are released out of, generators or an airplane over large basins.
When you say large basins, what's like square miles?
Well, that varies by state, by project, by program. So like here in Idaho, for example, let's take the Wood River Basin. So that's an entire basin. The Upper Snake River Basin, considering, the entire area that feeds water to that area. Half of the Payette Basin, where Idaho Power seeds around here. So these large geographic areas, and
like 50 square miles, 100 square miles. Like I would
getting
have
me.
to,
I don't know exactly what they are per basin, but hundreds
but
of
like
square miles. Hundreds of square miles.
Right?
Yes. Entire watersheds. Of dispersing grams of particulate, right? And so, we've talked about this before, like if you take a couple ounces, if you will, of powder and you dumped it out of an airplane, and I told you to go find it over an entire geographic basin, the likelihood that you're ever going to find, two of those particulates of a tiny little, ramekin of dust is next to none, right? And so we've gone out in the natural environment. We've tried to find it. We've tried to study it in the soil columns, in the water content. And the thing with silver iodide, the element that we're most concerned with is free silver. So Ag+, right? That's generally what's harmful to microorganisms, to fish that can accumulate. And silver iodide is not dissolvable, right? It has a solubility like pretty much close to white sand, if you will, right? White sand isn't going to dissolve in water. And so the particulate, you factor the amount of silver iodide that we're releasing, in addition to it being, insoluble in water. You can't even find it in the natural environment. In almost 80 years of cloud seeding worldwide, we haven't found a single place, a single area with evidence that it can accumulate to create any sort of effect on the natural environment. And that, again, that's not because we're not looking for it. It just doesn't accumulate because of the amount of particulate they're using. And so all these examples that you're giving with mining, with everything else, with, fertilizers for crops, things like that, we've measured those impacts. We know that they can create impact with a certain amount over time. And we've seen evidence that can happen. With cloud seeding, it just does not exist. There is not evidence of accumulation. And, some of the studies, Wyoming had a hearing last week, a legislative hearing, and they had an expert that testified. He actually measured some of the particulate in Idaho during the snowy campaign. And he basically did some calculations, and he said, well, it would take 10,000 years to double the amount of soil in the top amount of silver in the top 4 inches of soil. 10,000 years of cloud seeding. And that's assuming when you cloud seeding, it all falls in your target area, like right in that exact basin. None of it gets carried downwind or anything like that. 10,000 years of cloud seeding to create any effect to double, the amount that's already in the soil level. And so, we're talking about water.
And that's if it all stays there.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
That's not if it gets
dispersed through erosion, it goes downstream, right? And so we're talking about water being the most critical life source. We need it for population, we need it to live, we need it for agriculture, data centers need it. Obviously, AI is a new big thing. You need water to cool things. There's just water is a critical resource for everything. And so here we are, we have an industry that's trying to support the water needs that we have. And we're developing policy based on a complete lack of information that it shows any type of negative impact, yet we're willing to accept, like certain levels through mining, through fertilization, through other things. And there's just no evidence of it. And so how do we change that, and a lot of that, honestly, we've talked about this a lot. It goes back to communication. Like people want transparency, they want communication, they want information. And it's not that this industry is not willing to provide that, right? But as we all know, communication it's a full-time job, right? And you have scientists and researchers who, they're focused on advancing the science, the research, figuring out how to, utilize this tool and technology better. They're not full-time communication specialists, and a lot of us aren't on social media, so it's not it's not an intentional lack of transparency. It's just we don't generally have, communication support to be providing that information. And so that's definitely something that, national organizations like the North American Weather Mod Council, the Weather Mod Association, we're working critically hard to change that and to be able to provide more facts and information for people. But I think the large driver of policy today is really just the lack of facts and information out there.
Yeah, it's a tricky thing. Here's one thing that I thought about recently. So there are two. It's my understanding. You have silver iodide, and then you also have another type of cloud seeding mechanism, which is just liquid propane. And this is the same thing you would get out of like a Blue Rhino tank at the gas station.
Yep.
I have a buddy. He's a wild boy. His name's Adam. He's like an international rock star. Like Adam was this incredible musician in high school. And then afterwards, he's like, I'm just going full into music. And this dude's like a rock star. I was at his wedding, which was crazy. And he's gonzo. Like he's a partier, right? So he's like totally hammered, and somebody like throws a guitar because they have this incredible band, and he just rips just in his inebriated state, just this incredible riff. And I was like, God, Adam, like, how are you doing this? Anyway, so he gets invited to Burning Man, being the wild boy he is and an incredible musician. And they had this guitar that was also hooked up and throwing flames out I don't know what the hell you call it. But the point is he's up on this stage, flames coming out everywhere, like insane, right? And the flames were getting created by this gigantic propane tank that they just like lit this torch, right? The propane tank had to sit in a bath of hot water because as it was spewing the propane out, it was sucking heat out of the area and it would freeze over and the flames would cease to exist. Because in the process of, you have liquid propane that turns to a gas and you pull heat out as it goes from a solid to gas, right? Mm-hmm. You go to a lower pressure system and that creates it would freeze over, right? So essentially the propane tank would cease to exist. This is the same physical property that's utilized in cloud seeding with liquid propane. You have a gigantic propane tank in an area where you have moisture that hasn't turned to snow, and you set it up for the disbursement of the liquid propane, same stuff you get out of the Blue Rhino, to essentially be injected, or rather just let go into a lower pressure system. Mm-hmm. As in high elevations as clouds go by, and they're like, oh, perfect. Like, here we go. We have ice crystals that form almost instantaneously, because the same thing that my buddy was doing at Burning Man.
Yeah, so I will say
that was a horrible explanation, but like, just imagine a flame coming out of a guitar, and that's, cloud seeding. Yeah.
So to be clear, it's something that we're still investigating. There is a program actually in Utah that's utilized liquid propane for quite some time, but yes, liquid propane is an alternative seeding mechanism that can be used for cloud seeding. The difference is it has to be released in a cloud, right? It has to be released right where there's liquid propane. And so here in Idaho, the Water Resource Board has funded some
right
research.
Where there's liquid in the air.
So the super cool liquid water content, the same stuff that you need that seeding material to get up to in the sky. Yeah. The liquid propane generator has to be basically in cloud, right? Gotcha. So with silver iodide, you can put a generator on the mountain. You can run a plane through a cloud and disperse silver iodide to nucleate that process. But with liquid propane generators, and mind you, we're only testing this on the ground. It has been considered for aircraft, but never studied broadly, I guess, on aircraft.
heavy.
Yeah, there's a lot of different safety concerns, other reasons, right? And so we're studying it, through ground generators. And unlike silver iodide, where you can stick it on the side of the mountain and rely on winds to carry that material up, that material has to be released into the cloud, right? So you have to find somewhere where you basically have cloud level, some high elevation plateau. And so here in Idaho, we started studying that in the Little Camas Prairie, right? Because you have some of those cloud tops that with super cooled liquid water, a lot to say, that exist across the prairie. And so the Water Resource Board has actually funded some study in partnership with the state of Utah and the National Center for Atmospheric Research to really look at the efficacy of liquid propane with generators. And so they've done a few seasons of that, and again, Utah's used that in certain areas, but I would say that's still kind of a new and upcoming. The challenge, or not really a challenge, but the difference with liquid propane is that it can nucleate ice at warmer temperatures than silver iodide can, right? So it's never going to replace silver iodide as a seeding mechanism. It's really just an alternative to add to your toolbox, if you will, right? As temperatures, we're seeing climate temperatures change. I'm not going to go down that road, but obviously, we're seeing warmer winters, warmer conditions. And so liquid propane is potentially a seeding mechanism that can be used, when you don't have that same temperature regime as silver iodide. But again, it's not going to replace it. It's really just an alternative tool that you can utilize in the toolbox of cloud seeding to create more snow.
The concept of supercooled liquid didn't get explained to me until recently. And the idea, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the idea behind supercooled liquid is that we're all told water freezes at 32 degrees Fahrenheit, right? It's like, boom, you turn to ice. But that actually isn't the whole story, because what you can do in lab settings is you can get liquid water, to maintain its liquid form all the way down to almost like negative 40 degrees. You can have water that doesn't phase shift into a solid, and you can have it there well below the 32 degrees, because essentially what you need is somewhere for that ice crystal to form, right? Like you need, I watched this terrible, like what was it? Ghostbusters. There it is. The Ghostbusters movie. Recently it came out, like a Frozen, dynasty or kingdom, or I don't know, it was really, really bad. Anyway, but like the ghost in this one freezes things, right? And you had this image you had the scene where everybody froze in this room. And it's like the classic scene where it's like the ice creeping up the window glass and all these things. And of course, you don't have ice just forming in the middle of the room. The ice is grabbing onto something on the walls and forming on the walls. What silver iodide does is, when you have liquid water that has not made the jump to a solid and it's well below freezing, super cooled, but still liquid, silver iodide offers it somewhere to grab onto in the right shape, right? In the right size. And it's like, hey, come over here and just attach to me and make snow. And the water's like, damn, man, that's a great idea.
Yeah. I think going back to some of the fundamentals, that's probably one of the key things that a lot of folks don't understand, is that we don't use silver iodide because of its chemical composition or anything that it can do chemically. It is 100% a physical process, right? And so we know that water exists in 3 different states: a liquid state, a gas state, and a solid state, right? And so the point of cloud seeding is really to provide a physical mechanism for water to change from liquid to a solid, right? And it needs a physical structure to do that. So precipitation in the natural environment, that is exactly how it works, right? You have dust and aerosol particles that float around in the air, and those dust and aerosol particles will latch on to what we call supercooled liquid water. So 32 degrees is the minimum that something can freeze. But yes, as you said, it can exist in a liquid state. And that's what you see in a cloud, right? The clouds that you see overhead is actually water that is existing in a liquid state below 32 degrees Fahrenheit, right? And so by introducing more physical particles like silver iodide, it's the physical shape, as we talked about, right? It's hexagonal. It's the exact same shape as naturally occurring ice. And that's the only reason that we use silver iodide. It has nothing to do with its chemical composition and everything to do with the fact that it's a hexagonal shape and its aerosol form, just like naturally occurring ice. So you're essentially just giving it a little tiny boost so that the water droplets that are in that cloud can attach to it and grow into ice, just like ice does naturally. And that's why we say it's a boosting mechanism, right? It's not a chemical process. We're simply giving it more particulates to start the ice formation process. And so once you release those aerosols, water droplets, super cool liquid water will jump onto it. And then you can Google videos of this and watch ice crystals grow, right? If you give it a nucleus is what we call it, water droplets attached to it, and then all of a sudden you see that little branching and you get all these beautiful different crystal shapes, that you
Sure.
that you drew as a kid.
Right.
Same thing that happens, right? And so once that starts to grow, I mean, it'll start to, basically a snowball effect. You get more and more water droplets. It gets bigger and bigger until it becomes heavy enough to fall out of the sky. And boom, you get more precipitation, right? And so that's the whole point of cloud seeding. It's not to create some chemical process that, in turn creates water. It's a physical process.
Man, that is why I didn't understand that. Very similar, actually. I saw a documentary on oceans a long time ago, and there are a lot of problems with like wave generators, and there are a lot of problems with anything that goes in the ocean, things are going to attach to, which is wild because if you go through the ocean, you're kind of like, okay, especially like the deep ocean, whatever. You're like, all right, there's nothing really here, right? All you have to do is drop a buoy or a ship or something out there, and all of a sudden little tiny things start to grow on it, and then slightly larger things, and then slightly larger things, and then you have this ecosystem that exists around this physical object. All of the stuff was there ready to go. It just needed something to anchor onto, like a buoy or quite unfortunately a wave generator, because like a lot of them sink because they get out there, and then all of a sudden it's like this growth happens around it. Now again, everything was there ready to go. You just had to put something out there for everything to grab onto, and then this process started. So that's essentially like the same thing with the silver iodide. It just becomes that buoy in the middle of the ocean, and then things grow on it, and then drops.
Exactly. A lot of people don't understand that like wintertime clouds that we get, when you see clouds overhead, they're not very efficient at creating rain themselves. So just some round numbers, that we've looked at. Only about 6% of all of the water content in a cloud, 30% of the water content in a cloud of the atmosphere will ultimately condense into a cloud. And of that, only about 6%. So that cloud's only going to bring about 6% of its water content will fall out as precipitation. A lot of that will continue to evaporate, to move downwind. And so by cloud seeding, really if we're affecting, like 1%, I think of the overall water content, is what we're looking at. Like less than 1% is the water content we end up affecting through cloud seeding in this giant pool of water. I mean, you're thinking about the big question that we get is, are you robbing Peter to pay Paul, right? Are you taking water from one system that goes to another? And the answer to that is no. Generally we think that there's actually a net positive effect. Once you start that snowball effect and that water starts to move downwind, it will continue to create more precipitation. Downwind, but clouds in themselves are not very effective at creating precipitation. And so that's why we like to remind people that we're only enhancing their natural ability. They have a ton of water content built up that doesn't actually fall down. And if we can wring out just an additional % of water, that's fresh water that's trapped in the atmosphere, infinitely more water than we have on the ground versus pumping it out of the ground, taking it out of streams. This is one of the things that I like to go back to is we all learned about the water cycle, right? You learned about the water cycle in school. That water evaporates, it goes down the mountains, goes into the ocean, then it condensates, goes back up to the sky, and it's a whole circle. And so with cloud seeding, we're essentially just diverting water from a different part of the circle. Everybody's okay with diverting water on the ground through groundwater pumping, reservoirs, streams, but the concept of diverting water from the top of the water cycle where there's infinitely more fresh water is just, something that folks can't comprehend quite yet. And so I like to remind people, okay, you have the water cycle. We all believe in that. It's, the only difference is that we are essentially diverting water from the top of the system versus the bottom.
One thing that people get really freaked out about, or at least that I've heard, is they're like, you shouldn't mess with the weather cycle. And it's like, okay, like that's fine. I think a lot of people have to, like, I don't want my undue share of storms or droughts or things like that. But the water in the sky, on the surface, and beneath the surface are all things we are manipulating, right? We're trying to coax and store more water in the aquifers. We're trying to stretch the water resource we have on the surface. We're trying to get more rain out of the sky. Because at the end of the day, that all leads to better water supply, better crop capacities, like better for everyone. There's nobody that wants less water. And that's essentially how this is viewed, right? It's like we have a water resource in the sky. Can we get a little bit more out within reason, obviously, because nobody wants floods and nobody wants, major problems, which we don't, very thankfully, we don't really have in Idaho. Like we haven't, had flash floods and stuff. I'm sure we, not like ever, but like, it's not something that that you guys are participating in. There's very clear regulation around what you guys can and can't do, right?
Right. Right. And to be very clear, cloud seeding cannot contribute to or create flooding. Similarly, it can't, mitigate for wildfire. There's some very clear things that cloud seeding can and cannot do. So when cloud seeding is utilized, it's utilized in a specific storm as it's passing through, right? Once that storm passes, the effects of cloud seeding yesterday are not going to affect the flooding that happens tomorrow because of the system that came through, right? And again, we go back to the concept of, very, very small quantities of water that we're affecting. And, a lot of people would say, well, then why do we do it? Why do we spend the money if it's a very small amount? Well, you think about here in Idaho, we've done what's called target control analysis. We've looked at SNOTEL data and compared pre and post seeding, and we've been able to develop a statistical relationship. So anybody can do this. You can look at historical SNOTEL data, compare, two like basins, and measure the percent change after cloud seeding. And so here in Idaho, we're very lucky. We have decades of data. We found somewhere in the neighborhood of 7 to 10%. And somebody would be like, well, that's not very much. But when you put that into a water volume, what we've estimated is, between 1.2 million acre feet of water. That's not an insignificant amount of water. That's enough to fill, Palisades Reservoir here in Idaho. That's enough to fill the entire Boise River system. So Arrow Rock, Lucky Peak, Anderson Ranch, that's not an insignificant amount because we're talking about a very, very large quantity of water that exists in the sky. And yes, we're only affecting a negligible amount, of water in the sky, but that's water on the ground that is very significant, for water users, especially in these areas where we conduct cloud seeding. And so generally where you see cloud seeding, an interesting fact is, honestly, if you look at the history of cloud seeding over so we've had cloud seeding here basically since the 50s, right? And it kind of stopped and started over the years. And if you overlay that with the drought index, you kind of notice a pattern, right? Like cloud seeding is, more existent when you have drought conditions. It's less, when there's water supply, people are less willing to invest in it. And so around the world, you kind of notice the people who more participate in cloud seeding are people who are dealing with water supply scarcity, right? Or people who have, some type of water supply challenges. So here in Idaho, obviously it's a big deal for our agriculture. We're seeing less and less water available. So we have farmers here in Idaho. A lot of people don't know this, is the water districts actually pay into the cloud seeding program here, right? Because that water is critical. And then you go back to, a lot of the folks that are proposing bans and legislation against cloud seeding. Often what you find are those people live in areas where they can turn on the water faucet and they don't have any problems or challenges. And I think this is critical for people to understand, because it's not that people are just believing in hocus pocus, because they have water demands, but they're more willing to invest in reasonable strategies to really do the research, do the homework to figure out what's going to make a difference.
Yeah, predictively produce
exactly.
a result. You also see this argument against, and again, totally different industry, but you see this argument against environmental groups as well that, how did somebody put it? They were like emotionally... So I can't remember exactly what it was, but essentially the point is that people in urbanized areas outside of the state of Idaho get hyper emotional and like emotionally intoxicated. It's like emotionally intoxicated urbanites. This guy Scott, I think this was his line. Emotionally intoxicated. I could be misquoting it, but the point is you get people, they were like romantic about the grizzly bear. They're like so romantic about wolves. They're so romantic about these things. It's like, that's fine. I had Brody Harshbarger, one of our fish and game commissioners, on. He has grizzly bears in his front yard. He also has children, right? So you're like, okay, yeah, we like the grizzly bear. There's one at his children's swing set right now. Do we like that? Right. And, Brody was not advocating for, the death and destruction of every single grizzly bear. He's just saying, look, man, we had a target range for grizzly bear populations. We've exceeded that target range. And now I have them swinging on the swing. Right. And like and like, I even think that I'm like, oh, that's so cute. But like, in reality, You have to be experiencing the problem to be sympathetic to the position.
Yeah.
So yeah, and this goes for any problem, right? So yeah, if you don't have water problems, and we have plenty of agricultural land in the state of Idaho that does not have pressurized irrigation. They just deal with the sky. It's like whenever it rains, and we get it and it's great, whatever, no problem. But that's not what's going on in the south of Idaho, right? Like the east or the west. Like we have pressurized irrigation. We have the aquifer that we're really trying to work with and coax as much water out of all of our water resources as humanly possible. And if you're just in a removed place, just mad for, because you're worried that they're cloud seeding, it's like, I'm not a farmer. I have children. I have no dog in this hunt, right? Like I'm not trying to stretch. Well, I mean, I am actually on a domestic well, believe it or not. Speaking of, you have stuff coming out of the ground. There's no, like when I got educated on domestic wells, they're like, okay, so this well has a lot of iron in it. That's why you see stains on the sidewalk here. There, it's going to be orangey, right? Mm-hmm. She has arsenic. I was like, what? A neighbor. They have arsenic that comes out of the well. I was like, what? And it's like everything you can imagine. You have the good, the bad, and the ugly that's in the ground and comes out. So when people talk about like, I tested my water and it has X, it must be Southwest Airlines.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, but a lot of things come out of the ground that aren't great, right? And this is a natural, like you can't just blame it on a, plane flying by.
Right.
I don't know. I just went on, like I blacked out for a second. I can't get too many things. My point is that like you have to be engaging the problem, and just somebody saying, hey, there's this bad stuff in my water, therefore it must be, these people must be responsible. What happened in Tennessee, by the way? And where are all the people? I actually talked to somebody from Tennessee. They're like, the skies were clear for like a week and then they started seeding again. I was like, they started seeding again. Who's they? They're like, them.
The inevitable question.
They're like, it's a deep state operation. Like, how do we, like, what do you even do?
There still remains no evidence of it. Tennessee passed legislation last year. Florida passed legislation. Tennessee's AG even came out and specifically said, it's really not enforceable because they can't find any evidence of somebody intentionally spraying chemicals in the sky, right? The only explanation we have is aircraft condensation trails. And yet they moved forward with policy. And that's largely why, I mean, like I said, over 34 different states where legislation or this policy has popped up. And primarily the reason why it hasn't moved forward is exactly for this reason, right? It's not enforceable. There's zero evidence. Like, listening to the Wyoming testimony that happened last week with their legislature, this question was even brought up, how are we going to create policy that we can enforce? Who are we going to fine? Who are we going to basically get in trouble for doing this when there's zero evidence to suggest that it's even happening, and in Florida, for example, the sort of their response was creating a hotline, right? So if you see condensation trails in the sky, you can call this hotline, and then what? And nothing, right? And so this hotline has happened. Imagine, Florida's passed this legislation
right now. Can we hang on a sec? There's literally like a condensation in the sky hotline for Florida. You're not messing with me.
No, I'm not messing with you.
Oh
so you can literally call. There's some type of hotline in Florida where you can call. You can report trails in the sky. And to my knowledge, to date, I'm sure there's been lots of reports, but they still haven't found anybody.
Oh my gosh. Here it is. God bless America. We're not going to call it.
No.
But the fact, wow.
Yeah.
This is wild stuff.
It is.
It's wild stuff. And again, like I live here. Mm-hmm. I am absolutely against a lot of bad things. And if I tested my ground, my soil or my water, as we are doing because I'm on a well, and I found silver iodide, you would hear from me so fast, I would just be incensed.
Right.
And the fact that farmers in particular, agricultural individuals, support this and water use support this, when they're the ones getting this sprayed, theoretically in a manner that would either land in their agriculture, or they're taking the water that's at least in part a product of this and spraying it on their land. It's like, okay, if it were accumulating, if it were damaging this land, who would participate in that?
Right.
They'd probably be like, get the hell out of here. You're not bringing that crazy monkey stuff in here. And
Exactly.
but they're literally engaged in supporting the endeavor.
Right. And that's one of the unfortunate parts about this industry is, there seems to be this large scale conception that it's something nefarious, right? That people are out to harm, or to do harm by spraying chemicals, and I like to go back and remind people that we're doing this to create more water sustainability. So not only water for agriculture, water for growing populations. I mean, we've seen that massively here in Idaho, water for industries. We're seeing a lot of different industry come into Idaho. Everything everybody loves about Idaho, the fish, the wildlife, the mountains,
The whole thing, yeah.
everything. I mean, and to be clear, it cannot mitigate for or support wildfire by any means, right? I mean, I guess if
Why
you're
not? Why not?
Well, because the weather has to exist, right?
What do you mean?
During fire season, generally the reason fires are happening is because it's hot and dry, right? You don't have the conditionings, you don't have clouds to be able to generate water and bring it down. So I guess theoretically, if you're creating more water in the mountains and you're keeping those soils and those plants more moist, maybe in a roundabout way, that you're helping mitigate for it slightly, but you cannot have a wildfire come in, do cloud seeding and create more rain. That cannot happen. I want to be very clear about that. And honestly, that's one of the things that I think is also critical for people to understand is, overselling cloud seeding is equally as dangerous as understanding the nuances of misinformation, right? Cloud seeding is not going to fix drought. It is not a cure-all, and I'm here to say, to be very clear about that, it's a tool in the toolbox, right? You have lots of different water management strategies that still have to exist to work in conjunction with. It is just one tool to add more water to a system. It's not going to turn deserts green. You're not going to create habitable, farmable land in an area that otherwise wasn't. Because again, going back to this concept, a cloud has to exist to seed a cloud. You must have a cloud to seed a cloud, right? And so you're still reliant upon, the weather conditions that you are given to be able to wring more water out of the sky. And so, I want to be very clear with people that it is a tool. It can generate more water. It can be meaningful. It can create meaningful amounts of water, but it's not going to cure drought, right? It's not going to make deserts green. It's not going to mitigate for wildfire. We have to be clear about what we know and what we don't know, and understand that it's not going to be this holy grail, to come in and save the water supply. It's just a tool in the toolbox. And so I think that's equally as critical for people to understand.
It's my understanding, again, I'm not an idiot when it comes to this stuff, but when you're talking about different systems, water management systems, if you look at the life cycle of, say, some snowpack, right? Mm-hmm. So you have a winter storm, you have a plane go zigzag through it, fire at some silver iodide, you have increased snowpack on that peak. That starts melting at, like March, April, whenever. And we have a lot of water now coming through our systems. That's not when we need all of our water, right? Yeah, maybe some, but that's not when we need all of it, which creates the water management issue, which is, okay, when we have max snowpack runoff, we need to be able to manage that water, either grab it in reservoirs, we need to dump it back into the aquifer, which is like a giant water bottle. We need to, run it through a lot of different systems. How we're getting to use it, right? Because you may be using it in crops that produce, and in a manner that produces incidental recharge. You might be storing it up like a giant battery for hydroelectricity. Where it's falling, this is the other big piece of water management. A gallon of water is worth a different amount depending on what the elevation the gallon of water exists in. If you produce a gallon of water at the peak of a mountain and then that water goes through all of the different systems that it may hit. It could go through like a hydroelectric dam and then be used as flood irrigation or used into the recharge or however, like all these different ways, and then come back out in springs and then be used in a hydroelectric dam. Like you could get the life cycle of 1 gallon of water at the right place could go through like 5 or 6 or 7 use case iterations and be beneficial the whole way. And this is producing water that, again, if managed appropriately through reservoir systems and irrigation systems and hydroelectric systems, could produce so much, but it's that water management.
Exactly. And I think you kind of hit on a critical piece, because the $1 million question that a lot of people have is, what is the benefit of cloud seeding? What is the value of it? And exactly what you just explained, one single drop of water, if we increase the snowpack by 10%, for one thing, more snow in the mountains means more water to run off later. And you're correct. We are seeing earlier melt off. We're running out of that water supply sooner than later. So if you can add more water supply into the mountains, maybe you can extend that runoff. Maybe you can extend your growing season, for example, by a tiny little bit. But say you produced, I don't know, like I mentioned, here in Idaho, we estimate across all basins where we cloud seed a little over 1 million acre feet of additional water, right? And who does that benefit? It's sort of $1 million question because of exactly what you just explained. That water is going to run down from the mountain. It's going to saturate into ground. We're seeing drier soils, so more water for soil content, more water for important fish species in the mountain. That comes down, that goes through ag, that goes back into the aquifer, that comes out the springs. You have water quality issues, as you're aware, all the way down the Snake. So you add more water. There's just compounding benefits, right? Recreation, that's another big thing here in Idaho. And so what is the value of, creating 10% more snowpack?
At that location.
Right, exactly.
Right. I'm sure it rains near Milner Dam. What's the value of a gallon of water a mile from Milner Dam compared to a gallon of water up near the former Teton Dam? Right. Like these are wildly different value propositions for water. Man, these wild times. Kayla Golden, we've been going for a little while here. Listen, this doesn't have to be the last time we talk. Is there anything you really want to hit on that we haven't talked about today?
Well, no.
No. Listen, come back.
I think let's covered a lot of.
I really want to see the Doppler radar stuff where you guys saw zigzags and whatnot. Like I want to talk to people that are engaging and operating and that are, I want to talk to also like farmers that are in huge support. I've had Paul Arrington and the president of the Water Users, executive director, many times. Love Paul. He's great. And again, he says the same things. He's like, yeah, it's great. Like we get this huge bump. Well, huge compared to other things we can do of increasing water. Like there's no other thing we have.
I do want to be clear though. So the zigzag pattern that everybody refers to, this is maybe something that we didn't touch on, previously. And so that is a result of aircraft seeding, right? We have different types of cloud seeding that's going on, different types of technologies. And so maybe, I guess, just to high level, give some examples. Cloud seeding, as we've said, has been around since the 50s. That really started with, the manual ground generators. So literally like a keg can of beer in somebody's backyard where somebody has to go turn it on. We evolved over time. That became, remote ground generators. So now we can stick them a little bit higher. They're more important location where we're seeing those super cool liquid water. And then aircraft is obviously the other thing. And so aircraft is really the only thing that's been well studied, well validated. So snowy, as we've talked about, the groundbreaking research that happened here in Idaho, where we saw zigzag patterns on a radar, an unnatural pattern, was directly the result of aircraft seeding, right? Manned aircraft seeding. And so today's day and age, we have different tools and technology to capture different layers of the atmosphere. Each have sort of a specific use case based on how they can create seeding. Now we're also seeing drone technologies. Those will also have sort of a narrow use case for where those can be used. But ultimately, the only piece of technology that's been really well studied, the zigzag patterns that we commonly refer to, are, based on manned aircraft. And so that's not to say that other tools and technologies can't, support cloud seeding, but this is a rapidly evolving industry. So we're seeing a lot of different growth in the different tools and technology. A lot of people are starting to hear more about those things. And it's definitely something that I would encourage states and public agencies and the public to keep paying attention to. Is the evolution of this industry.
Oh, I think the public's paying attention. They're locked on. God bless him, man. Kayla, I appreciate you. Let's keep this going. Let's keep the conversation around what this is, because again, even as I said, I didn't even understand the whole, we're looking for a physical process, not a chemical process, until like a couple weeks ago. And somebody explained like, no, bro, like hexagon.
Yeah.
Like you ever see a 3-sided snowflake? No, it's a hexagon. You need a tiny little thing that's shaped like a hexagon and the ice grabs onto it and it makes a snowflake. You can't do it with a circle thing. You can't do a 3-sided thing, 4-sided, get the hell out. We need a 6-sided thing. It has to be around this big, all these things. I was like, okay, I'm officially the biggest idiot ever. But like, again, this stuff is really complex and it took me a long time to even understand that. So I'd love to, have you back in and talk more about that, supercold liquids and lab research.
Sounds good.
Perfect. Thank you.
All right. Till next time.